City, there was an experiment done with a new type of pharmaceutical, and 18 patients were given a certain drug over the course of several weeks and months. Now, each of these 18 patients had a very specific kind of rectal cancer, and it was one that essentially mutated so often that the body's immune system could not keep up with it at all. And it wasn't just that it was mutating so often, but this particular type of cancer was such that essentially it hid itself. The cells hide themselves from the body's immune system. After many months, I believe it was announced in June, when all of the patients had received this drug and taken it over the course of whatever time it was, weeks, months, etc., when they all came back, all 18 of them were completely 100% cancer-free and no side effects at all. Now, of course, the scientific community got very excited about this, and it was all over the news. It's much too early to see just how far-reaching these results will be, because it's obviously a very specific and very rare type of cancer. But of course, it's very encouraging news and quite amazing, because this possibly could be used elsewhere. What this drug essentially did was, for the first time, even though these very aggressive and insidious and damaging cancer cells were hidden from the body, what this drug did essentially was, when the person took it, the cancer cells were revealed to the body's immune system. And immediately, the white blood cells, or however the process worked, attacked the cancer cells and eliminated them. Very interesting, very interesting. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a pharmacist, so I can't say exactly how this works with other types of cancer, but one would think that with something so aggressive and making some kind of a breakthrough, it's something that it brings a lot of people great hope. My question this morning, brothers and sisters, is what do we have in our life, potentially, that also is aggressive, insidious, kind of hidden and flies under the radar in our own life, but yet is very damaging and brings us suffering and affliction? And either we ourselves do not detect it, or perhaps those around us do not even detect it. What cancerous thing in our life exists right now? Things like anger, envy, jealousy, lust, and there are many kinds of lust. There's many different types of things that a human being can lust after. Is there anything that is damaging us in our lives that perhaps we do not see, but nevertheless brings us a great deal of sorrow and affliction and is flying under the radar, as it were, if you will? The amount of suffering and tribulation, which, by the way, is not unique to us, it's something that is common, unfortunately, sadly, throughout human history. But the amount of tribulation and suffering that the apostles went through, and specifically the Apostle Paul, really is staggering. Today we heard from his second letter to the Corinthians, and the second letter to the Corinthians, St. Paul forgoes his usual greeting and he skips straight to the part about his suffering. And not just about his suffering, but the great suffering that he's recently gone through. In fact, he talks about an affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly, unbearably crushed, he says, that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received a sentence of death, so that we would not rely on ourselves, but God who raises the dead. In other words, he himself was so afflicted, so damaged, so much suffering, that he was essentially feeling like he was close to death. And we know from his letters and from the book of Acts and from history and biblical archaeology that St. Paul went through a lot. He was shunned by his people, the Jews. He was persecuted by the Romans, who were the authority in his day, and beaten and imprisoned and stoned and scourged and all kinds of things. And he was treated poorly also by some of the Christians of his day, those who thought that he was teaching something very contrarian to what they knew, or something controversial to what they knew. And so no matter where he went, whether it was in prison, whether it was in these communities, whether it was being shipwrecked, no matter what it was, St. Paul was afflicted. And he himself had a great deal of suffering in his life. physical, emotional, and spiritual. And yet, what does St. Paul say today? Does he wallow in his sorrow over the course of the whole letter? He talks about his sorrow, yes. But ultimately, what is the message that he's getting to? And for that matter, not just him, but all the apostles talked about this as well. We heard today in his beautiful passage say, "Brethren, it is God who says, 'Let light shine out of darkness.'" It is God who says that in the midst of all of what we're going through, he says, "Let there be light." I mean, he's quoting the story of creation and also the story of the Gospel of John, which we read at Pascha. But essentially what he's saying is no matter what type of suffering we're going through, God says, "Let light shine out of the darkness." Whatever darkness is in our life, whatever is afflicting us and making us suffer and go through all these trials and pain and so forth, God says, "Let light shine where there is darkness." When one considers all that he went through, and yet to have this level of hope, yet to have this message that is encouraging and was meant to be encouraging to the Christians also that were going through a lot of similar things as to what he went through, is absolutely mind-blowing. It is staggering to consider all that he and the other apostles went through, and still they were able to say, "God is with you." God can and has and will overcome whatever darkness is in our lives. That is the message that he proclaimed till the moment of his death, and even after, I'm sure. St. John Chrysostom, when he reads these words of the apostle, talks about how, yes, all of us, and St. John Chrysostom himself went through a great deal in his life. He was exiled by the Byzantine royalty 4 times, and ultimately died in exile, or at least died from the afflictions that he received, the damage to his body that he received from his exile. And yet St. John Chrysostom says, yes, as St. Paul says, we are afflicted, we are in pain, we are suffering, we are dying, and yet God is with us. And God will not allow us to be overcome by these things. Specifically, he says, by the blizzard of the calamities. His power is still going to be made manifest. So often in the lives of the saints, we hear the same message, including some of the saints that we're celebrating even today. St. Sergius of Radonej and others. St. Nikolai Velimirovich, who lived during actually World War II, said, kind of encapsulates what we're talking about today in a very beautiful way. He said, "There is no amount of darkness that can ever exist that can contain the light of even one single candle." There is no amount of darkness that can contain the light of even one single candle, he said. If we were to believe that about one single candle, and it's true, then how much more is it true with the light of Christ? How much more can the darkness not comprehend it, as the Gospel of John says? How much more can the light of Christ in our own lives, brothers and sisters, overcome the darkness? And so, if we indeed, brothers and sisters, do have something metaphorically cancerous in our life that's going through our life, something that maybe is damaging to us and we don't even know the extent of what damage is there, like this experimental drug that had great success, the light of Christ also can reveal what we're suffering from and ultimately heal what we're suffering from. God's light is more powerful than anything we are going through in our life. And that is the message that St. Paul and the church affirm over and over and over again. Let us remember this in these moments of despair and darkness and affliction, to remember that no amount of darkness can ever contain the light of Christ. For he says, "Let light shine out of the darkness." God bless you. Amen.